Overnight in a tense Oregon hearing, a federal judge blocking President Trump's attempt to deploy members of the California National Guard into Portland, saying she was troubled by the Trump administration's attempt to circumvent an order she'd issued just a day earlier. Trump had already tried to send in Oregon National Guard troops to Portland. That was halted on Saturday. The administration then tried on Sunday to send the troops in from California. Then late last night, Judge Karen Immerget, a Trump appointee, issued a new, broader order prohibiting the administration from using federal control to send any state's National Guard into Oregon, and pressing the government's attorney, saying, quote, "You are an officer of the court. Do you believe that this is an appropriate way to deal with my order, or an order that a judge issues that you disagree with, or is that an appropriate mechanism to appeal as you have done?"
All right, folks, so we have some emergency breaking news which broke late last night. Donald Trump is escalating his war on blue cities, blue states, the American people, and the notion of political dissent writ large, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, folks, as that video explains, a Trump-appointed judge, not some sort of like hippie liberal or progressive judge appointed by President Biden or President Obama, but a Trump-appointed judge, has slapped down repeatedly. It's almost like whack-a-mole, one right after another. Trump's attempts to federalize the Oregon National Guard, then the California National Guard, and now the Texas National Guard. And we need to break down this timeline because this is incredibly dangerous. As Kyle Cheney, who is a senior legal affairs reporter for Politico, reports, last night, breaking, Judge Immerget has called a 10 p.m. hearing on Trump's effort to circumvent her National Guard order by calling up California troops. Okay? So we're going to break this down. And then in response to that getting struck down, just to kind of skip around here a little bit, again, Trump tried to call up the Texas National Guard. Sam Stein from The Bulwark notes, deputizing red state guardsmen to go into blue states against the wishes of the governor of that state. John Favreau of Pod Save America also made a really compelling point. Trump is now deploying red state military to blue states over the objection of the people's elected representatives in those states. He's ordering U.S. troops to patrol cities in places that, at worst, have a couple of blocks that could use a few more police or even some federal law enforcement. A judge that Trump appointed just ruled that Trump's deployment isn't legal, saying there's no evidence that the protests were, quote, significantly violent or disruptive. But Trump is sending U.S. troops in anyway, from a red state, right after he told a room full of generals that the country is at war with an enemy from within, and after Trump just told the Navy that the country has to, quote, take care of the Democrats. Trump is sending our military in to protect an army of masked federal agents who, while they may have begun by focusing on violent criminals, are now arresting legal residents and American citizens so they can hit Stephen Miller's quota or lose their jobs. They're filming themselves, using force against people who have not yet been found guilty of a crime. They're violating the basic Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights of Americans every day. The person they report to, the most powerful White House official, calls the opposition party a domestic extremist organization and accuses judges who rule against him of being legal insurrectionists. More on that in a moment. I honestly don't know how Democrats can have any part of funding a government that will use the money to continue this. I don't know how this is not the focus right now. It's a good point. Perhaps Democrats should make this a broader argument against funding the government, right? It's possible. Right now, Democrats are mostly focused on health care because it's their best polling advantage, polling policy area, but perhaps they should make a broader case. We'll talk about that. Stephen Miller, the White House official in question, was apoplectic that a Trump-appointed judge ruled against Trump in these ways. He says legal insurrection. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, not an Oregon judge. Portland and Oregon law enforcement, at the direction of local leaders, have refused to aid ICE officers facing relentless terrorist assault and threats to life. There are more local law enforcement officers in Oregon than there are guns and badges in the FBI nationwide. This is an organized terrorist attack on the federal government and its officers, and the deployment of troops is an absolute necessity to defend our personnel, our laws, our government, public order, and the republic itself. Okay. Now, Kyle Cheney responded, going back to the Politico senior legal affairs reporter. He points out, listen, there are ways per every court, including the Supreme Court, that a president can overstep his authority to deploy the military. It is not absolute. He has to do it within the confines of the law. He's not a king. He's not a monarch. This Trump-appointed judge found that Trump did so here, in part because the DOJ presented no evidence of a threat that can't be managed by regular law enforcement. Miller's issue seems to be with DOJ for not presenting evidence of this organized terrorist attack, rather than the judge for ruling on the evidence that the Trump administration put before her. In other words, listen, if the situation's as dire as you claim it is, it should be relatively easy for you to just actually provide that evidence and make a persuasive case if it's really that chaotic here. Of course, they haven't, and they can't because it's not. Governor Newsom's press office says America do not stay silent in the face of reckless and authoritarian conduct by the President of the United States. Speak up, indeed. Speaking of governors, J.B. Pritzker, who is the governor of Illinois, not Oregon, but remember, Trump is trying to send Texas National Guard not just to Oregon, but also to Illinois, says, I call on Governor Abbott to immediately withdraw any support for this decision and refuse to coordinate. There is no reason a president should send military troops into a sovereign state without their knowledge, consent, or cooperation. In response, Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, the Republican, responded to Governor Pritzker and said, I fully authorize the president to call up 400 members of the Texas National Guard to ensure safety for federal officials. You can either fully enforce protection for federal employees or get out of the way and let the Texas Guard do it. No guard can match the training, skill, and expertise of the Texas National Guard. They defend our country with pride. America must also know that Texas still has thousands of National Guard assisting with border security. So I just want to put a pause here for just a second and point out that when President Biden was in office, there was, I can't remember if it was 2023 or 2024, there was an issue about the Texas local law enforcement and the Texas National Guard trying to usurp federal border authority, right? We don't like how the Biden administration is enforcing border law, so we're going to do it ourselves, even though it is exclusively the province of the federal government. And damn it, if we have to impede federal troops and federal agents, we will. And there was basically a standoff, and I remember we did videos about it. It was a really tense situation where people were wondering, will President Biden try to federalize the Texas National Guard? Will he send the National Guard of other states to Texas if need be, to put down what may be an insurrection by Texas against the federal government over an area that Texas has no authority, which is the border? The federal government has exclusive supremacy over the border, including the border in Texas. In other words, if President Biden says one thing and a Republican governor of Texas says another, Biden always wins, Abbott always loses, because it's about an area of federal law enforcement, the border. Even the 6-3 conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court ruled in Biden's favor when it got to the Supreme Court and said, hey, Texas, you can't obstruct federal authority here. Okay, you just can't do that. Okay, that's how black and white it was. But I remember at the time, Abbott and Kristi Noem, who's now the DHS secretary, but she was the governor of South Dakota at the time, freaking out in public like, President Biden, Joe Biden can't, he can't be doing that. He can't be like trying to take over the National Guard or sending in the National Guard from other states of Texas. That's like an invasion. And Biden never did that. To be clear, Biden never did that. But that is precisely what Trump and Abbott are doing here. So they're hypocrites and losers of the highest order. And perhaps the next Democratic president should give them a taste of their own medicine. Say, just to give you a taste, we're going to federalize your National Guard, and we're sending in the National Guard of other states into Texas to do X, Y, and Z. But just to give you a taste of your own medicine. You don't like it? Then don't ever fucking do it when a Republican's in power. Maybe that's what the next Democratic president should do. Because clearly, they'll bitch about it. They'll bitch about the notion of it. Biden never talked about it. It never happened. But that was a fear that Republican governors and Greg Abbott had at the time when Biden was in power. Now they're doing the very thing they feared because they have the power, and they're hypocrites and losers. So again, maybe turnabout's fair play. Governor Gavin Newsom of California said in response to what Governor Pritzker had to say, this is a breathtaking abuse of the law and power by the President of the United States. America is on the brink of martial law. Don't be silent. Ryan Goodman, a lawyer, says this represents a major escalation. Trump's effort to mobilize the Texas National Guard for deployment in Portland and Chicago. There was a court filing, which we discussed. Judge Immergant on Oregon v. Trump now. I grant plaintiffs a second motion for a TRO. Federalized Texas and California Guard to Portland is a, quote, direct contravention of the court's TRO from Saturday. Okay? That's what the judge is saying. Judge Immergant issued a second temporary restraining order, TRO, this one following an emergency hearing. She's blocking the deployment of other states' federalized guards to Oregon, California, Texas, it doesn't matter. Brian Schatz, Democratic senator from Hawaii, says, I would like to hear from a single Republican that deploying the National Guard from one state to another, to be more specific, from Republican states to Democratic states, is the red line. I plan to ask them directly tomorrow, but excuse time is over. Excuse time is over and history watches. And so let's get to Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller says the judge preposterously and unlawfully enjoined the federalizing of the Oregon National Guard to defend a federal facility under attack. Sending Guard already under federal control or Guard volunteered by another state for a federal mission were in no way impacted by the prior crazy ruling. In all cases, the decision rests solely with the president and commander-in-chief, so he's pissed. An Oregon judge ruled that the commander-in-chief cannot station federal troops in her state to defend the lives of federal officers. So that's basically what has happened so far. A Trump-appointed judge has said, hey, listen, you are acting unlawfully, you are acting illegally, you are lying, you are not presenting evidence to support your claims. And when she smacked down the federalization of the Oregon National Guard, he tried to circumvent it with California and then Texas, and she had to convene an emergency order, read Trump the Riot Act, and slap that down true. You can't send any state's National Guard into Oregon. Now, could that be overturned by a higher court? Very possible, all right? But this is where we are. This is the biggest escalation in Trump's attempts to crack down on blue cities, blue states, the American people, and political dissent. And again, we are only 9 months in to this administration. We have about 3 years, a little more than 3 years to go. It's a shocking escalation. It's incredibly dangerous, and Governor Newsom is right. This is incredibly authoritarian, and we are on the verge, it seems, of yet another Trump-triggered constitutional crisis. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.